Now, the Chris Evers, Philip Mantle, Inside Outer Limits radio show, Flying Disc Press, Outer Limits magazine endorse any of the products you may have heard advertised at the beginning or the end of this show or inserted into the middle of this show. The only products we do endorse are those that are strictly affiliated to Outer Limits magazine or to Flying Disc Press. We now hope you enjoy the show. Thank you. Inside Outer Limits is a regular feature on the Paranormal UK radio network. Hello there everybody once more. Welcome to another edition of Inside Outer Limits radio show with myself, Chris Evers, the man from the Outer Limits magazine, and also my co-host, who you all know better of course as UFO royalty, the one and only Mr. Philip Mantle. Hello Philip, how are you?
Good evening Chris, I'm fine thank you.
Great
Safe
stuff.
and well here in sunny Pontefract as usual.
Yeah, I know it's sunny there, mate, even though, it's midnight nearly, it's always sunny in Pontefract. Listen, there's been some interesting stuff come up on Facebook quite recently, hasn't there, about a certain individual by the name of Nick Pope?
Yes, I was interviewed just the day before yesterday by Martin Willis. Martin's in New York. And as soon as he'd finished interviewing myself, he went on to interview an old friend of mine and someone we've spoken to on here as well,
yeah.
Chris, and that's Dr. David Clarke from Sheffield. And to begin with, David was talking about his research into the Rendlesham Forest incident. And of course, David is the person that's responsible for all the MOD UFO files being released. He worked with the National Archives on all of it, and of course he was the first person to obtain a copy of the file that they had on the Rendlesham Forest incident. I think it was back in 2001 he obtained that.
Yeah.
There's no smoking gun in it, as David explains on the interview. It's mostly a file of correspondence from people like me or you.
Yeah.
I got asking about Nick Pope, and David had altercations in the past, I believe, with Nick Pope, but David says that Nick Pope was never in charge of any UFO department at the MOD and didn't do any investigations. He never left his office. And the fact that the MOD did indeed do investigations on occasion, but it was a completely different department to the one in which Nick Pope worked.
It was DI-55, wasn't it?
DI-55, Defence Intelligence 55.
Yeah.
And it was even that department and a chap called Ron Haddo, who was responsible for putting together what became known as the Condign Report, which is the MOD's UFO study. Whose conclusion, of course, these were atmospheric phenomena of some kind. And so, as far as David was concerned, Nick Pope never did what he claims to have done.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of people have agreed with that stance, to my surprise. And it's a stance I must admit I share with David. I've known David an awful long time. He was a UFO investigator as a teenager. People think because he's a skeptic that he's never done any work or he's never done any investigations. Well, I can assure you it's quite the opposite. He was even part of Bufora's committee at one point. So he was one of those that helped coordinate things with Bufora. Mm-hmm. And now David, I think his degree was in archaeology. He went on to take his PhD in folklore, but in between times he became a journalist. He worked for the Sheffield Star. He worked as a freelance as well, and he's ended up at Hallam University in Sheffield teaching journalism. He's now also associate professor of folklore, I believe. They're starting or they have started a folklore department there. So David is a very experienced UFO researcher and investigator, and although he doesn't believe in aliens or the extraterrestrial hypothesis, theory, he does believe that there is some anomalous phenomena. And even when we go back to the Rendlesham case, David will said, I don't know what Burroughs and Pennison saw that night in Rendlesham Forest. They had an encounter, but with what, he doesn't know. So it's not people have called him a debunker and all this kind of thing, but he's certainly not. I mean, he knows his onions, so to speak.
Yeah, I'd view him more really. He's a little bit like Mike Eston Rogers, isn't he? He's a little bit more of a realist more than anything else, is David.
Well, David, as I said, he's got a PhD in folklore, so he understands how stories work, how they're generated, how they grow, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're total fabrication. There could be something at the bottom of it all. But David rightly points out, in my humble opinion, that when it comes to the Rendlesham Forest incident, that it was poorly investigated at the beginning.
Yeah.
Going back 40 years now, which in turn has led to a whole host of problems that could probably never be resolved. But yes, he did say, quite openly that as far as he's concerned, Nick Pope did not run the UK government's UFO project and wasn't the UK government's UFO expert. And it'd be interesting to see if Mr. Pope responds to that. We shall see.
It would be. Perhaps that's a subject for another show, Phil.
Yeah, maybe indeed, yes.
Absolutely. Now, I think we've got a bit of an interesting show lined up for today, haven't we? Who we got, Phil?
Got a very interesting guest on our show today. It's a lady that although I haven't seen in a few years, I do know, and I've met before. It's a lady from north of the border. It's Tricia Robinson. I'm not going to read out her full CV because A, it'll only embarrass her, and B, it'll take too long. But Tricia,
plus it's got connected words, mate, which you're not very good at.
Yeah, I mean, Tricia is what I would call one of the leading lights in psychical research. She was at one point a mathematics and physics teacher, so we better be on our best behaviour tonight, Mr. Evers, or we're likely to get told off.
Yeah, we'll get 100 lines, Phil.
She's been a long-term member of the Scottish Society for Psychical Research and has served it in a variety of forms. She's lectured literally here, there and everywhere, and is an author of a number of books. I believe the third one of which is out now. It's Life and Death, but not as you know it. So I'll say no more than that. And I'd like to welcome Tricia Robinson to the show. Good evening, Tricia.
Good evening, Philip and Chris. Good evening.
Hi, Tricia. Thanks for joining us.
So one of the things we normally do, Tricia, I've got to admit, most of the time we've spoken to people on here about UFOs. So it's lovely to have a different topic this evening. And one of the things we ask is, how did you get involved in this subject, Tricia? You were a maths and physics teacher. How did you get involved in investigating psychic phenomena?
Well, it's all very strange, and as you two guys know, life is very strange. Never would I have thought 30 years ago that I would be doing this, but whatever power is behind all our thinking had other ideas. Well, I started off in my 30s. I was married. I had 2 children. We had 2 good jobs, 2 cars, and a dog. Not a cat, but a dog. As Atgeroy would have said, the whole catastrophe. And we had a lovely house, and we were all very happy. Nothing was wrong. I was not unhappy. I had no bereavements. I didn't look into the subject of life after death for any bereavement purposes. It was just really an intellectual interest. Now, I should say at this point that I have no mediumistic ability whatsoever. It's got nothing to do with that. I'm as psychic as a wooden leg, so that's a good thing. I've got the kind of mind of a lawyer that I look for evidence in everything that I do. And the question, you've asked me a question I actually can't answer because I don't know why I started to look. I don't know, except that one of my friends and I decided just to go to the big spiritualist church in Glasgow and just to see what was going on. Now, I also have to add that I had no particular religious upbringing. My father was an agnostic and my mother didn't bother. So that was actually an advantage. I was not brainwashed brainwashed into any particular, and I don't even just mean Christianity, any religion. I wasn't brought up and indoctrinated in any religion, so that is a huge advantage. I was coming from a null standpoint regarding evidence of what was going on. So anyway, Carol and I went down, and first of all, we couldn't find the church, which is actually quite funny, but that's a different matter. And then we eventually got in, and I began to listen. I began to listen to what was going on. And we went back a couple of times, and people really seemed to be getting something from the mediums on the platform. So I then, out of my kind of mind I began to accost people in the corridors later and ask them if that actually was true. Did it mean anything? And gradually I did that sort of all over the place. And I began to think, yeah, there's something in it. And as you guys know, in science, the first thing is when you're examining something is to find out, is there something in it? So the first premise was met. Yeah, there appears to be something in it. So from then, the powers that be, whoever design our will, made me meet Professor Archie Roy. And Archie Roy was he was in the Society for Psychical Research in London at that time. He's also a past president. And we sort of were thrown together into talking about these things. And then Archie and I started to go out on what we call spontaneous cases. Just as you have spontaneous phenomena in UFOs, we have spontaneous cases in paranormal phenomena. Now, to be honest, most of the spontaneous cases are a waste of time. They're usually somebody's imagination, but there are spontaneous cases that are very difficult to pinpoint the reason as to why they happen. All very interesting and intriguing. And then Archie had the idea of founding the Scottish Society for Psychical Research in 1987, and I was one of the people on the original committee. And from then, the Scottish Society flourished. I served in many jobs, from making cups of tea right up to being president. I was also treasurer and every secretary, any job you could think of. And it was extremely interesting. And I was able to command lecturers from all over Britain, in fact, and all over the world too. I had people from the Stargate project in America. I've had people from the University of Virginia regarding Ian Stevenson's work. All sorts of people from every denomination, all very, very interesting and intriguing. Now, I know that you guys are all about outer limits, and it's mostly to do with UFOs and things in the skies. Well, I would say that I investigate the outer limits of human experience regarding paranormal phenomena, because that is basically what it is. And probably like yourselves, when you start to delve into these things, the more you go in, the more you realise that you do not know. And there's always something to come along, hopefully, and change your ideas as to what is actually happening at any particular time. As I say, I started off in a very, very small way, and that is how I actually got into it. And then Archie Roy and I, we gave lectures at Glasgow University at night time, evening classes called Adult Education, and we called it an Introduction to Psychical Research. And those classes, we did it for 6 to 8 years, 6 to 8, not 6 to 8, 6 to 8 years, and they were extremely popular. People didn't realise just what psychical research was. In fact, most people don't even know what it is now. But psychical research, very quickly, is the study of any phenomena that we cannot understand. UFOs would come into that as well, but it's not something that I'm proficient in. I leave that to the likes of Philip Mantle and all the others that have done it for years and years and years. And the third, I'll start off very quickly. When Archie Roy and I did the 6 to 8 year courses at the university, which were very popular, altogether we did 40 hours in each session with a particular class. A lot of information there. Now, when Archie died in 2012, I had obviously lots and lots of lectures, lot of experience, been out in a lot of spontaneous cases, and by that time Archie and I had done a 5-year experiment on testing mediums, actually testing the hypothesis that all medium statements were so general they could apply to anyone. Anyway, that's a very, very long process. But anyway, we ended up with a graph with 1,600 points on it. and giving 5 years of our lives devoting to doing this experiment all over the UK. And we had to conclude that the hypothesis was wrong, that the odds against good mediums, and I say good mediums, the odds against good mediums talking rubbish is 1,000,000 to 1, which in any scientific explanation is excellent. That is just one particular thing. So now, when Archie died in 2012, I thought to myself, I have all this information about all kinds of phenomena. You're talking about drop-in communicators, excellent mediumship, poltergeist activity, near-death experiences, out-of-body, reincarnation, obsession, possession, overshadowing, all sorts of things, even weirder things that happen to people in real life. And I thought, I've got all this information. I really should put it in a book. So that's where book 1 came from, Things You Can Do When You're Dead. And book 1 was very sensible, explained it all, what it was all about, the credibility of the people that investigated things in psychical research, and so on and so forth, with a lot of my own material in it as well.
I was just wondering, Tricia, when you first went to the spiritualist church with your friend, or later, was there any one incident or incidents that thought, yeah, I think there's something to this? Did you have an epiphany at any point, or was it a gradual realization?
It was a very, very gradual realization. There was no epiphany, if you want to call it. You see, psychical research, mediumship on its own is I don't want to say nothing in case there's any mediums listening. Mediumship on its own is only one way of trying to communicate with people who have passed over. And of course, nowadays, we have electronic voice phenomena, and that is actually doing very well at the moment. But back to the point, mediumship's only one way of looking and trying to communicate with people who have passed over. You've all the other things, like, as I say, poltergeist activity, people trying to make themselves known that have passed, all of these things, electronic voice phenomena, all sorts of different things. It builds up into a great ball of information. And when you put it all together, and there are certain topics, one for me is the drop-in communicator. Now, for those who don't know, if people are perhaps sitting in a circle and someone comes through the medium that nobody knows, the medium doesn't know the person, no sitter knows the person, and yet that person's able to give their name, information about themselves, and when it's examined later on by anyone who's interested, you find that person exists. And I've given examples of those in the first 2 books, actually, and they are totally and utterly outstanding. That someone comes through that nobody knows, it could be from a different country. For example, Iceland, Rudolf Runelson came through another group completely and told so clearly where he was born, where he was dead, and all of that thing. And in another one later on, not in Iceland, the man came through America and gave social security number. That's a very good thing to do, is give your social security number, and nobody in the circle knows, and loads and loads of them. That kind of, this is a very interesting time.
I would agree with you. I mean, before I became involved in UFOs, I was fascinated by the paranormal. And I was in my early teens, Tricia, my best friend got the street from us, literally. And I went to the spiritual church there, and I have no disrespect for the medium at all. People call them liars and cheats and all this. Well, there may be one or two, but as far as I was concerned, these people genuinely believed what they were doing. I just found it fascinating, but not necessarily proof of life after death.
No, it's not. You're right. Yeah, you're right.
And it's the same. My interest waned, of course. I became involved in UFOs. Then when I married my ex-wife, Sue, whom you met when I went to you in Glasgow, she was very interested in paranormal. So we all helped then. We went to the social church there many times. It was very odd, by the way, but the church, it was a house, and it had been donated to them. So they pulled all the other buildings down around it, and they would not move, Tricia. So as you drove past, there was wool and everything, and just this house in the middle of it. That was the spiritualist church.
Right.
And we were there on many occasions. I found fascinating. I just couldn't see where there was the proof of life after death.
No, you're absolutely right.
And I remember years back hearing, like you were saying there, some electronic voice phenomena, and it was supposedly late to Winston Churchill. And I think on this recording he spoke in 3 different languages, which to me didn't make any sense at all. I'm not saying he wasn't multilingual when he was alive, But it's just, I don't know. It was, for me, there was just so, it's like UFOs, Tricia. I've no doubt there is a UFO phenomenon, but I'm not 100% convinced that we're being visited by beings from our world.
Yeah, that's a good standpoint.
So I'm the same with, and I love reading about what you did with the adult education program, because I actually did one with a chap called Andy Roberts on UFOs at the Wakefield Adult Education Centre. And it was great fun. And the only thing that stopped it was my day job. I just couldn't fit it in anymore. Otherwise, we would have done more. But I think that's a great achievement, Tricia.
It is.
I really do, because I know from my own experience, it's not easy to do and to plan and to present it in a certain way.
Well,
and
we were able to use a DVD, video, and all that sort of thing. You know, people in a lecture hall have only a 20-minute attention span. So every so often I'd throw in a bit of sound or DVD or something like that, or incorporate a joke. A joke's always a good thing as well. And the other thing when you're investigating the paranormal is not to take yourself too seriously, but to take the subject seriously in a funny way. But I'm going to go back to something now. What you've said is absolutely correct. Everything to do with mediumship at that level is not evidential unless you are getting the particular message and you know it means something to you. It's not evidential to the general public. But one of my epiphanies, as you call it, happened fairly recently in the large scale of time as things were. Now, as I said to you earlier on, I used to go when you go investigating these things, you never go alone. You always go with two people, and if we had to go to a case, we always had two people going. But in the case I'm going to tell you about is actually an exception. People got to know me as someone that kind of knew about these things. I don't know how they get to know, but they did. Anyway, this woman one day approached me and she said, could I speak to you about my daughter? My daughter was murdered 6 months ago and the police don't seem to be getting anywhere. I wonder if you could help me. And I thought, well, I don't know you, I don't know your daughter. I said, certainly. I said, I'll see what I can do. And I thought, she wants me to set up a reading with a medium, but I'm not doing that because if our daughter was murdered 6 months ago, it's far too raw to set her up with a medium. So I said to her, I don't know if you know what psychometry is. You two guys probably do know what psychometry is.
Yes.
Yeah, I know what that is. It's the use of objects to find out the past,
and I
basically.
said to her, now, I don't know about you guys, but when I'm flying blind and I don't know what I'm talking about, I always seem to be good. And I said to this woman, well, if we can meet again and you can bring me an envelope with something belonging to your daughter, I said, I will take it to several mediums and see if they can get anything to help you. It was as simple as that. No big deal. So I can't remember if it was the next week or whatever. And the woman brought me this brown A5 envelope with things that I could only describe as hard and lumpy. It obviously wasn't a watch. It obviously wasn't a ring. It was just hard and bumpy. And of course, the envelope was sealed and I would never open it. So I said, well, leave it with me. I obviously had her phone number by this time. So I took it to a couple of mediums that I know and they weren't saying very much about it. One man said, oh, this is something to do with somebody that died and it's something to do with a taxi. And it's a girl, and the girl had been at the dentist the morning that she was murdered. Of course, I haven't a clue. I don't even know anything about the murder. So, of course, I'd take note of all this. That was one. Another one said it was something else. And I thought, this is not very good at all. So I might as well say his name now because I think most people know. So as you might know, I'm fairly friendly with Gordon Smith, who's an absolutely fantastic medium. Gordon is great, but Gordon's not only a great medium, he's a good friend, which can look like a downside, but it's not. And Gordon and I are only friends because I respect what he does and he respects what I do. And at that particular point in time, I was able just to go to Gordon's house, more or less come in and just, have a cup of tea. So I thought, I'm getting nowhere with this envelope. So I went to Gordon's house, let myself in, and Gordon's sitting at a big table. They had a big table in the middle of this room with his computer in one hand and a cigarette in the other. And he goes, "Hi, Tricia." And I said, "Hi, Gordon." I said, "I want you to do something for me." Now, I never ask anyone to do anything. I have never asked a medium in my life that I know for a reading. I would not do that. So I just threw this brown envelope down in front of him. And I said, "I want you to put your hand in that and tell me if you get anything from it." And he looked at me with disdain and said, "Do I have to?" And I went, "Yeah." And he went, "Oh, God, right, okay." So he put the cigarette down and he put his hand on the envelope. And immediately his eyes popped open. And he said, "Tricia, a girl here that was murdered." And I just nodded. And he said, she's got sort of medium-length brown hair. He was describing her. And then he gave me 29 pieces of specific information pertaining to this girl. And it was like a 3-way conversation. He said, "She's telling me that she misses her 3 cats. She's telling me that her boyfriend," and she gave a name. Her boyfriend was the first one to know that she was murdered, and he phoned my mum. She's telling me that she lived up in a street with a cul-de-sac, and she lived in a close, we call it a close, what do you call it in England? One up her. She's got 2 tattoos at the top of her left breast, and described the tattoos and the colours. Another one right arm, described the tattoos, colour again. She's telling me that the newspaper reports at the time had description of those who had all wrong, and she said that was completely wrong, and she said she was wearing the time. So of course, Dana's taking line by line every single thing that he's seen. And of course, I don't know anything. The media don't know anything. And then came the cruncher, Philip. She told me that she was in Continental prison when she was young. And I'm thinking, bloody hell, that's not something you would say, "Oh, it's not like yes, that's how it got to be right, and it's wrong."
Very specific.
Yeah. Don't tell me that any I'm sorry, Continental prison, of course, you know, that's either right or it's wrong. And anyway, altogether, I can't remember the rest of it, and I have no clue as to it. Okay, the other one was, my mother has moved my photograph from the top of the mantelpiece to the top of the television today, as we speak. And I thought, okay, I thought that would but no, I can't, they'll maybe come to me in a minute, but all very specific things like that. There was no specific typing it off to it, and specific. So that's fine. So I just meet the mother a couple of days later. At that time, I had the mother's address. I still didn't think about the murder because it had been 6 months, and it wasn't in Glasgow. It was a bit out of Glasgow, where I live in the outskirts, but not near this family. So I got to the woman's house and I walked in. And the first thing I saw was a photograph of Idol on top of the television we have now, of course. And I said, "Oh, hello." I said, "Is that your daughter?" She said, "I told you for Dave." And I thought, okay. But then I said, "No, I'm going to read out some statements to you. And I want you to tell me if they're right or if they're wrong. There's no duality. It's got to be 100% correct if that statement is correct." So everything I told you before in this conversation here, every single thing, she had 3 cats, she lived in a cul-de-sac, one up on the right. The boyfriend was the first one to know she was dead. He phoned the mum. The tattoos, the clothes that she was actually wearing that she was murdered were absolutely spot on. I was told she was in Portonville prison when she was young. She said, "Yes, that's right." Now, I chickened out. I did a psychical research working. I didn't ask her about the pregnancy because I thought if you don't know that she had determination of pregnancy and they've all been murdered, I'm not going to ask her the date. So I did mention that. People see me descriptions of people that murdered her. She said it was 2 people and she gave me descriptions of them. I also didn't say that to her. I thought I was trying to do there were plenty of information, including the ones I didn't speak out. So I only gave them 22 pieces of information. And every single specific piece of information was absolutely right. And that was I wasn't to say, "I know shit," well, that was wow. You know, I can't explain that. There was something they didn't know, and they didn't know. The descriptions were perfect.
Well, that's fascinating, Tricia.
That's totally fascinating,
absolutely.
that, isn't
Well,
it?
what I would say is, like I said, I believe in there is paranormal phenomena. But I think it's not paranormal leads to life or death.
Well, it's not. No, it's
So
not.
I'm just trying to clarify. Tricia, I found that story fascinating. You know, 2 things. One, because it's been this person in the news recently because he suffered it, and that's the Yorkshire River. And Sutcliffe. Now, he's lost his life within Headley, the outskirts of Leeds. A young lady had got the bus out of Leeds. I think she was a student, and he got up in a big student area, and he'd just been sat in his car. I think he met his car seat, and she walked round the side of the like a shopping precinct in Headingley, and up his path, and that's where he had murdered.
Yeah.
What's interesting that's not really been made clear. I was friendly with a journalist at the time who was very interested in psychic phenomena, she told me that they before they caught the Ripper, they actually brought in a psychic. I can't remember the name of my. And the psychic walked up the street. Everybody knew where the street was, where the body was found, but she just walked straight up as if she knew, where she was going. She wasn't from the area at all, Tricia. And there were some bushes. She went straight to the bushes, bent down, picked up a piece of paper and handed it to police. And this piece of paper was all, screwed up. And when they unfolded it, it was two matchstick men drawings, and one with a knife stabbing the other one. And that was where they found the last victim of the Yorkshire Ripper.
Yes, well, on the point you're talking about, I'll just finish what I was going to say about I call it murder and foul, that I wrote. The interesting thing is, because the Akashic records say that the medium is tapping into some unseen library, digitized library somewhere and trotting out this information. But the interesting thing about this case is the girl was giving information about things that happened after she died. So it's not the Akashic record of things that happened to her while she was alive. And it was very much a three-way conversation. He would say, she's telling me this and she's telling me that. And he was as astounded as I was, actually. But what you say is absolutely right, and that's what I make clear in my third book. Very quickly, the first two books, they're not all to do with life after death. It's to do with different phenomena and obsession, possession, things like that. All of that are things that can happen that way. My third book is more in your line. It's weird because I speak about things like, I don't know, have either of you heard of Jared Quasey, the Dutch clairvoyant?
No.
Right. Jared Quasey was something else. My third book, I did research in different areas because it's not about mediumship in itself. You're right. Normally, mediumship in itself, no. And I'm getting specific information for you, then you'll believe it if it happens to you. And it's essentially good to get information if it happens to you. For example, he said it quickly in the third. This is just a little vignette. And I know Ricky Martin recently, in a private conversation now, he was telling me this, but not the recipient's name. It was a young man whose mother died, and the man was not doing well at all. And Ricky was giving them various things about the mother and all that. And the boy was a young man with a mess until Ricky said, "Your mother wants to know why you're now sleeping on 3 pillows." And he nearly wet himself. His jaw dropped because he only been sleeping on 3 pillows since his mother died. So there's another little vignette about information after the person passed. Let's go back to Jerry Quasey. Jerry Quasey was a Dutch clairvoyant who actually worked with the Dutch police in Utrecht, I think, for 40 years. Now, also in my third book, and you two guys will probably read this, the people you investigate sometimes are not always the easiest people to go with. Some actually can be a pain in the butt, and you have to really work hard to get into the phenomena. Now, Jared Quasey, in a way, came into this case. Now, Jared Quasey could locate people who were alive, people who were dead, tell you things about people in the past who were actually alive or dead, and he could also predict the future with an experimental. He said, "I can do this. It's a gift from God, and I don't know how I do it, but he could do it." I'll do quickly. I'll tell it in all detail, of course, in the third book. So the professors from the University of Utrecht and all over, they decided to test him to see just how good he was. So they said, "We're going to try something. Are you willing to try?" "Yeah, I'll give it a try." So they set up an experiment. They said, "We will seek a venue in about 30 days' time. We will set out 40 seats of them, and we'll tell you near the time. We want you to predict who is going to sit on seat number 9. And okay, goodbye. So anyway, very, very long story short, with very many protocols in place, blind seating, everything, and where they chose the venue chosen by a person, and a fourth person would set up the people who were going to come to the meeting. Nobody knew where they were going to sit because of the randomisation process. You argue in at random, and you had to put your bum on that seat for the whole experiment. And Percy, in great detail, could describe the person who would sit in that seat like 30 days later. That experiment was played well throughout the world with Jared Quasey, and he never failed. Now, what does that tell us? I don't know. I'm asking you. But it tells us some people don't incorporate a life threat hypothesis for that kind of thing. To me, it's more like a kind of remote viewing. And I don't know where the line is drawn between remote viewing and talking to a spirit. I can do it full strength. And when the medium was telling you that it was a very real situation where Gerard Quasi was quite distant when he was telling people, even though the information was correct. So you're quite right, you don't always need to employ, and next way, clinicians, all these things, they don't have a spiritual hypothesis, living life after death.
It still has me doubting this because I've had my own near-death experience, although I never died. You know, I had a near-fatal heart attack in August 1999. And then 10 years later, heart failure. That nearly killed me 2 or 3 times. So eventually I ended up with a pacemaker with a defibrillator in it.
Yeah.
And in March 2016, I came home from work and I was in the kitchen cooking dinner for me and my wife, Christine, when I had an attack of what's called arrhythmia.
Yeah.
It's where your heart just suddenly speeds right up.
Yep.
And my knees buckled. You know, I put one hand on the kitchen unit trying to put it for I reset my heart's rhythm. And it was the defib that saved my bacon that day. But I remember watching all this as if I was a third party at the end of the kitchen looking down on it.
Do you know the funny thing about that, Philip? It's always looking down. Anyone that has that, and it's very genuine.
Yeah.
It's usually the top corner of the ceiling. They're looking down in themselves. And before you tell me, I'll bet you had no emotion attached to that.
It's like watching something on TV. You know?
Right. Yep.
And I used to get to feet and stagger into the living room. And Christine called the ambulance, and off I went to hospital for a couple of weeks. And I still find it fascinating. I don't have any explanation for it, and I've told my wife Christine, and she just shrugs the shoulders. She's no idea. She thinks I'm crackers anyway, Tricia. So you know, it makes no difference anyway.
Well,
but you know, I have no doubt there is paranormal phenomena. I've experienced it myself. I've witnessed other things as well. But it's just this life after death thing that I just can't. I'm not doubting anything you've told us, by the way. I'm not doubting anybody's abilities. For me, I don't know what it is.
It's a hard thing to get your mind around if you haven't had the experience. Now, there's a huge body of evidence regarding near-death. Well, that was out of body you had. That wasn't a near-death experience. You had an out-of-body experience, and you could see it. And what you've described to me is 10 a penny. It happens to so many people. I
did speak to another paranormal researcher, and he said, well, you must have died, and it's pulled you back. And I said, no, I didn't die.
No, you didn't die.
I didn't die. My heart didn't stop. I didn't lose consciousness. I did not, but he won't have it. Well, you must have done. Well, no, I didn't.
No.
Because what he forgets is in my pacemaker is a recording device as well. So it records all the heart rhythm, and that's downloaded to a computer. And my heart didn't stop. Quite the opposite. The defib just reset it, and I'm forever grateful for it. I can assure you.
Yeah.
But
you didn't die, Philip. There's a big difference between out of body experience and near-death experience. Some people, and I don't approve of this, some people actually try to go out their own body so they travel to specific places. And seriously, there's books on this, how to try to go out of body.
Astral projection, if I remember correctly.
And I think it's horrendous. It's like people hypnotizing people to remember a previous life. There's no evidence in hypnosis ones either. The only ones to me that are evidential are children from when they can speak about their previous life. That's the only ones that I will actually give any credibility to, and that's a whole different story again. But going back to your out-of-body experience, if we hold a hypothesis, and it's only a hypothesis, now the word I use nowadays is consciousness. We're speaking just now, and hopefully us and our listeners are operating at a consciousness level of the beta waves in your brain. As you relax, you go down to alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha 3, right down to beta and theta. That's when you're sleeping. But things happen with consciousness. Now, nobody in the world, I don't care who you talk to, not even Dr. Peter Fenwick will agree as well, no scientist, no neuroscientist can tell you what consciousness is or where it lies. It's simply not just awareness of yourself. But if we go with consciousness at the moment as wave bands, you'll understand that better. We're speaking at the beta frequency at the moment. But when you have that out, So let's say, for example, the consciousness doesn't live in the body, because I don't think it actually does. The realizes only your consciousness is inhabiting the body you've got at present. That's why your consciousness move about in different ways. Out of body experience, this one came years and years ago. She was what I would call a wee Glasgow woman, we all know her, but just a wee ordinary Glasgow woman. And she had been trying to go out of body to try and visit her family in South Africa. She hadn't seen them for ages, and she actually managed it. And at one point, she ended up in our daughter-in-law's father or something like that. She ended up in their house. She ended up in this other man's house, and she could see him sitting reading the paper. And he looked up and he could see her. He said, "Get me, oh, you devil!" And she was so busy laughing, she ended up back in her own body again. There's so many elements of a out of body. So we could look at it as your consciousness leaves your body, or you could do the spirit philosophy and say that your spirit, that's your lesser self, leaves the body. I prefer consciousness myself. But it's the consciousness is what is the real you. Near death is different. You go through the number of light, etc. See your life review, and that's a much deeper phenomenon actually. I
remember I didn't have much on with it. I can assure you, but I still know. I suppose what convinced me of what you call out of body experience. I read it out some years ago now, Tricia. It was a gentleman who was when he was seriously ill, and he was in a little room on his own, and unbeknown to him, his wife was waiting outside in the corridor to come and see him, and died.
Yeah.
But they managed to resuscitate it. Right. But it was so tonight, so she said okay, and she went home. Came back the next day when it was a bit better. But in the room he was staying in, there was no window that he could look through from the bed. There was a window high up.
Yeah.
All he could see through it was the ceiling outside in the hallway.
Yeah.
But he said, I went up and I could look down out of this window and see my wife sat outside waiting to come in and see me.
Yeah.
And what he described, of course, was she was wearing a new hat. And she lost it that day to come in and speak. And I can't understand there was something to this. But like you said, I thought, well, we can pinpoint where our consciousness lies within us.
No, nobody can.
And I liken it to like the razor of a magnet. You can see a magnet, you can hold it in your hand and it doesn't do anything. But you put it near something, metallic, and its magnetic field will attract it. I always imagine our consciousness as something like that, but it wasn't restricted to body. With other things than other people. So the other thing that I think is what we class as paranormal, I think may go back to the times when we were. What can I say? Not living in a civilized society like we do today. For example, I watched a natural history program about a chap up the jungle with the natives, and they go off into the forest to hunt a monkey. And off they go. Then the foot stuff in because he's got his boots on, and they're all barefoot, and literally, bows and arrows at them themselves, and they wander off. They find a monkey. Shoot it, great, everybody's happy. And they just turn around and go back home. How to find the way?
Well, that's a skill, yeah. That's a different thing. But there was an experiment done at Manchester University again some years ago, where they got a number of students. They give them earmuffs and blindfold, and put them in a car and just drove them around randomly. Took out the car, just took their earmuffs off and said, "Point in which direction you believe you live." And I think it was about 60% of them got it right, Tricia. Oh, that's interesting.
Which is more than you would expect if they were just guessing.
Oh, God, yeah.
So I just think there was a time when we had the use of different abilities.
Well, I think so. I think that's the kind of thing that Jerry Quassi had. I should say at this point, he wasn't the easiest of men. When people phoned him up, he was actually quite grumpy with them. But to be honest, he always phoned them back and made good his grumpiness. The things I deal with in the third book are just so bizarre. You've probably heard of Ted Sirius, the man that could think an image onto a photographic film.
Tell us the title of your third book so any of our listeners know they can go and get a copy, Tricia, please.
The third book is called It's Life and Death, but Not As You Know It. And I'm trying to remember, and the subtitle is From the Unbelievable to the Bizarre, because believe me, there's a lot of bizarre things. What we're talking about now is nothing to some of the stuff that's in the book. It really isn't. I should tell you a funny story. I'm always a great believer in funny stories because funny stories to me have a better ring of truth to them. This is a very simple one going back years and years. Archie Roy and I went to this beautiful old people's home. It was a big stone building. It was terrific. And the woman had called us because a lot of the staff, not the people inmates, were seeing figures going through the walls in one of the lounges. And as I stress, it wasn't all people, it was some of the staff. In fact, some of the staff left because they could see them so often. Anyway, that's why we were told when we got there that's what she wanted to talk about. But also the woman that owned it had a great sense of life and death. She was really, really good. She believed that nobody should die alone, and she always made sure when someday their time had come, somebody would sit with them and they'd hold their hand, as they're dying in the room. So one day, somebody came and said, the woman's name was Mary. I can't remember her second name. They said, Mary in room such and such, she's about to go. The doctor says she's not got long. So she sent a nurse and a student nurse to sit with Mary. So one went in took one hand, one took the other hand, and she never closed the curtain. She said, just talk normally, just keep talking normally, and Mary will pass in her own time. Mary had no relatives. So they was just talking quietly but normally. And after a time, Mary opened her eyes and she sat up and she said, I can hear you talking about soup. She said, I think I'd like my dinner now. So Mary sat up. The girl went through to the owner and she said, Mary's sitting up in bed wanting her soup. And they couldn't understand that. It was just some way or other the girl's voice had called them back from death's door. The doctor had said she was dying, and there she was. And in the same not hotel, the old people's home, there was a woman died. So a few days later, a new person came into this room. And she started to complain to the owner. There's a woman comes into my room every night. She has a stick. She bangs her stick. And I can't get to sleep for this woman. Now, you could say that was imagination, an old person. And the woman said, can you describe the woman? Oh, yes. She was wearing a tartan shawl and she described this woman. And it was a perfect description of the woman who had been in the room that had recently died. So once again, we have this persistent link of someone who had died coming back to someone living.
Fascinating. But there's also things that are quite haphazard out there that don't seem to fit.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I'll give you an example. My wife, Sue, and I were in the Republic of San Marino, attending a UFO conference I was speaking at, believe it or not. And for whatever reason, we had twin beds in our bedroom.
Yeah.
So we were next to each other. So come on, I'm out cold. And she swore blind that a woman walked in through the door and just walked in and went straight into the bathroom.
Yeah.
And that her bed was also vibrating. And she complained to the hotel management about it. And I thought, well, I didn't hear a thing. I guess, well, if it's true, what do you think the hotel management's going to do about it? We weren't robbed during the night. The door was still locked when we got up in the morning. I just found it very peculiar. I'm not doubting her, don't get me wrong.
No.
I'll give you an example why. Some years back, I was invited to London to meet the deputy editor, I should say. I won't mention which paper, but one of the UK's biggest selling national newspapers. And we were going there to discuss me writing a UFO feature for them. So it's the days before email and all that. So off we went. We drove down to London, parked the car up in the building at reception. We got our security badges, and this gentleman's secretary come down and met us and took us up to his office, gave us a cup of coffee, and within 2 minutes he appeared. Never met him before, never spoken to him, had no idea what he looked like. And he said, have you had lunch yet? I said, no. So he says, come on, we'll go to the dining room. So he said, I've invited along the picture editor and the features editor. So there's half a dozen of us sat around this table. And you've met my wife, or ex-wife as she is now, Sue. She's always chatty, but she was just sat there very quiet. And I thought, what have I done? Have I done something wrong? And all of a sudden, she said to this this gentleman who had invited us down, do you know somebody by the name of Josh? And he stumbled and stuttered and changed the subject. So after lunch, we went back to his office, and he was not happy. He said, who have you been talking to about me? And I said, well, nobody. We only arrived 2 minutes before you appeared through the door. Bear in mind, this is the days before you could Google his name and things like that.
Oh, yeah.
And so he says to my ex, how did you know Josh? She said, I just saw the word Josh across your forehead in big capital letters. And I felt compelled to have to tell you. And this gentleman started crying. You know, he wasn't blubbing, but he had tears in his eyes.
Oh.
And he said, well, that was a girlfriend of mine when I was a young fella. But that was nothing close to her name. That was my nickname for her. And it did the trick, Tricia, because I got the assignment, I wrote the feature, and I got paid for it, and was friends with him for years.
Very good.
So I have no explanation for that. You know, my wife Sue didn't make it up. We'd no idea who this fella was.
This is what I'm saying about consciousness regarding the bed shaking, and that she was in a different area of consciousness than you were. She was in a different kind of space-time in her consciousness, so she could experience that, although you couldn't see it. And the Josh thing, Sue must be slightly psychic. She must be, for that to happen to her. She must.
I agree. You know when we're talking about consciousness, in your opinion, are we talking about consciousness as being the soul? And is it that we interact with, or you believe we interact with, when it comes to life after death? Are we speaking to our consciousness, our souls in heaven, or whatever it is they go?
What I do does not require a religious aspect to it, but it doesn't decry a religious aspect either. I would use the word consciousness rather than soul or spirit, because you are your own consciousness. You are your own being, whatever that is. It may be wrapped within, while you're here, it may be wrapped within some sort of ethereal body. I don't know. But I do know that you are your consciousness. That's the only thing that I know. And there does seem to be some, I don't know, I don't want to use the word power. There does seem to be some sort of universal thing that kind of looks after us and takes care of us. But I don't think, I'm not decrying any religion, and I think all religions are the same if they're going towards a higher consciousness, shall we say. I know there's a lot of crap spoken about higher consciousness. I'm not into the metaphysical stuff. I'll leave that to people that want to do that. But from my observations, what I've seen, it all comes down to consciousness, motivation, and intention. What you intend can usually happen, and you have to do things with the best intention, consciousness, and motivation to enjoy this life and progress possibly from it. There are so many avenues in psychical research. It would be possible to even touch on a small portion of them, in this particular short time. I believe your consciousness survives. There's enough evidence, there's a huge wealth of evidence, even looking at the reincarnation cases, there's a huge wealth of evidence to show you that some people's consciousness survive physical death. I don't know if everybody reincarnates, I have no idea, but I know there are certain cases which are beyond reasonable doubt, and that's what I go on, beyond reasonable doubt.
I understand that, but so when people, let's say we have a genuine, whatever that may be, or how you would come to that conclusion. Like you said, the lady saw the woman with the tartan shawl on it.
Yeah.
Was that? Would you call that a ghost?
Well, you see, you come back to the horrible word I call definitions. I don't like the word ghost. I don't like.
Well, call it what you will, but it's the same thing.
It's the same thing. It's an impersonation of a person who has actually passed over. Now, actually think about that. That makes sense. The woman who died. An
impersonation.
Yeah, it's a personification of that person. The woman who died had Alzheimer's, and she obviously wouldn't know she was dead. So it would make sense to me that she doesn't actually know, she's not actually crossed over, and she's really annoyed that someone's lying in a bed and she's banging the stick and telling her to get out. Now, the woman didn't make that up because she didn't know the woman.
No, I'm not saying anyone's made anything up. I'm just trying to clarify what we're talking about.
It would be the consciousness of the person who had died, but because she was demented, she hadn't realised she'd passed over.
You see, what puzzles me is why we don't see, we'll call them ghosts, for want of a better word, because everybody can connect with that word. Why don't we see ghosts of our ancient ancestors? And I'm not talking about, a couple of hundred years, I'm talking about tens of thousands of years ago, because they didn't sort of dress anything like us, and they may have looked pretty much like us, but we don't see them. We have ghosts of the Roman legions in York, because we know the Romans were there. We may see Vikings and things, because I know the Vikings were there. We don't see anybody, from prehistory that lived in the area. No ghosts of that. I mean, shouldn't we be seeing?
Well, it's not just as straightforward as that. There are places, and I can't name them at the moment, but there are certain locations in the whole of the UK and the world where people see reenactments of battles. They can see, there's some place, I thought it was York, but it can't be, where they see Roman horsemen coming through a certain...
I'm not talking about Romans, I'm going back to prehistory times. I'm talking tens of thousands of years before that, when Great Britain was still part of the European continent, and there looked nothing like any of that. But we don't see them, Tricia.
I have no idea. The oldest one that I can think of is, which is in one of my books, is the Battle of Nectansmere. A woman actually who didn't know anything about it saw. At night time, she saw a reenactment of what was going on there. But these are not, when you see these things, they're not really ghosts. That's why I don't like the word. These are, when an emotional event happens, and I don't understand it, there seems to be an imposition on the space and time of where that battle happened. It's like watching a video.
Sorry, Tricia, I was just going to slip in there with what you're talking about. Really, is not a reenactment, because that would imply somebody being dressed up and with plastic swords, etc. and reenacting the fight. What you're talking about really is a time slip of some description.
Yes, it's well, I don't even think it's that. We don't understand it. There's a thing called stone tape theory, in which you can see things like that, but the people, we'll say the consciousness of these people is not there. It's like watching a video that was impinged on the space and time at that time, and people can, if you're in the right state of consciousness, you can tap in. You've got the video switch. You can see what happened at that space and time. It doesn't mean to say that everybody would see it. This is yet another thing we don't understand.
What I don't understand as well. Is what about the animal kingdom? Do they not have consciousness? I mean, after all, the way I look upon us, we are part of the animal kingdom. We are Homo sapiens. Yes, we are mammals, and we're just an animal. At the moment, we are, top of the food chain. But the Earth has been around for billions of years, and creatures walk this Earth that long before us. But we don't see. I don't know what to call it now. We don't see ghosts of dinosaurs.
No, I've not heard of that. No, I have not heard of that. No.
But some people will see their pet dog or their cat.
Oh, they do. They do.
Yeah, but why not other animals? I don't know.
I don't know either. Why not? I mean, it's possible. All I know is within ourselves at this point in time in our life and where we are. We have a very complex consciousness structure. I don't know if you've heard of Dr. Eben Alexander. He's an American neurosurgeon, and he actually didn't believe in any of this at all until he had it was a meningococcal meningitis he had in the worst part of his brain, which you should normally die of. And he was in a coma for 7 days. But when he came out of the coma, which he shouldn't have, he's written a book. It's called Heaven is Real, and it's his account of what happened to him as a neurosurgeon, and he gives her all the reasons why these things shouldn't have happened, and he had a very specific, well, it was a near death, or if not death experience, but he managed to come back and tell everyone else about it. And he, as I say, he's a very, very notable man who would not say these things lightly. But you see, we're digressing again, and that's the problem with psychical research. There are so many topics. Many topics.
I find them all fascinating.
The thing is, you have to be careful, you have to be careful with the words that you use, I think, as well, because people often get mixed up with certain things. For example, soul, S-O-U-L, a lot of people think it's something that lives on after you die.
Well, I would call
spirit is another word they get mixed up with. They think that is something that lives on when you die. And also consciousness, some people use that to refer to the previous two, soul and spirit. So you've got to be careful.
They're all the same, Chris. They can call it spirit, they can call it soul, they can call it anything they like. It's the same thing. And this is why people are fed up hearing me saying this. I don't like definitions. I'm probably the only scientist that doesn't like an imprecise definition. We don't have a definition for soul. That's a religious thing. Spirit, fine.
Well,
it's okay, but it's all it's really fine.
What makes you is what you're referring to as a consciousness, that your train of thought, etc., etc. But when you talk about things like soul, obviously, if you could go down the religion, obviously you'd go straight to the Bible, wouldn't you? And you'd ask it to see what it says about that in the Bible. Now, the reason the Bible says the soul that's in it itself will die. And there's also, like Ecclesiastes 9:5, for the living know that they shall die, but the dead know not anything, neither have they any more a reward in anything on this earth, for the memory of them is forgotten. So we've got to be careful in how we describe things, so people get the right idea of what you're actually meaning.
You've got to remember there's only one religious book. I'm not applying to any religious book. You've also got to remember the Bible written after the Nazarene was here. I'm absolutely sure there was such a person as Jesus of Nazareth, and I'm absolutely sure that he was a prophet and a healer and all of that. But men twisted it, as men do, into for power, etc., etc. I can't speak for any other religion. So you've got to be very careful. That's why I stick to things like consciousness. There's no religious connotation in what I do at all. In fact, I'm not saying, and some people can use that as a tool to get absolutely. I'm going to go to spiritual healing now, because there's a whole chapters in all of my books. I did a study for 5 years on spiritual healing and psychic surgery. But taking me out of the question altogether, medical doctors like Randolph Bird, and I can't remember the others, they're all in the book, they did lots and lots of experimentation with distant healing. And they used, tremendous amounts of numbers. You're talking about hundreds, thousands of cases, etc. And they found that spiritual healing sensed in a non-religious context, that's like sending you, I'm sending because I hope it's better, I hope healing goes better. And you mean it, you have to mean it. Or you send it to receivers. So they had hundreds of thousands of different groups praying for people in a religious context, and praying for the same type of people in a non-religious context, and both were efficacious, both had very positive results, and there was very little difference between praying in a religious or a non-religious context. That's very interesting. I think that's why I call coordination oriented.
Fascinating, because it kind of reminds me, Tricia, again, completely out of context probably, but it's like a sporting event, a football fan. Why is it
don't bring in Uri Geller.
No, not mentioning Uri Geller. Why is it an advantage to play at home?
I don't know.
Because you've got your crowd behind you.
Yeah, possibly.
But it's the same rules. It's the same team no matter where you play, but it's always looked upon as an advantage to play at home. And it's like saying, getting all a silly phrase, all to does it work? I mean, I know what they call it. Faith healing is another word that's been used. Can you remember? Have I got the name correct? This is probably going back to the 1970s. I don't know if you remember a chap called Harry Edwards.
Oh, Harry Edwards.
Yeah, I remember, because my mum was from Ireland. She was from Northern Ireland. She was you would call her an Anglican, a Protestant. She used to like to being from Christian, but she went to Spiritualist church. But she used to write to Harry Edwards. And my mum was no great person of literature, but she said when he wrote back, it always made her feel better.
That's right. Oh, Harry Edwards, in fact, that sanctuary is still going at Burrows-on-Lee. I wasn't investigating this in the 70s. Harry Edwards did it for 40 years. They had a healing sanctuary at Burrows-on-Lee, and there are so many people, I think Andor Fodor would be one as well, but lots of people went down and investigated Harry Edwards. There's absolutely no doubt that the man had a tremendous proportion of tremendous healings. He could heal people's goiter by putting his hand on their cheek and just take his hand across the goiter will be gone. There's so many witnesses to that.
Yeah, it's taken me about an hour to remember his name. I got Harry, and I couldn't remember. I just couldn't remember his surname. So I thought I'm not going to say it until I remember it, and I wrote it down. I thought I'm sure that's the right one.
All you had to say, Phil, was what was the name of that really good English healer?
I'm going to pay books because we've literally got about 3 minutes left of the time that I've allotted for this, so I'm going to so we can get it.
I think it's, and I can never remember, iBookshop and iTunes, you can get it there, but Amazon's the best. If you go, and it's my author's name is Tricia J. Robertson. So it's, and they listed things you can do when you're dead is the first one. More things you can do when you're dead is the second one. And they're kind of quite normal but abnormal, and the third one is bizarre because I haven't even touched on any of the weirdest phenomena which would interest you. Can I go back to something I don't know? You guys are really interested.
Sorry, Trish, just before you do, just confirm please, are they available paperback and Kindle?
Yes.
That's great, thank you. Sorry to interrupt, go ahead.
A question for you guys. I don't do UFOs simply because I've got so much else to think about. Now, the UFO thing again, I think you come very much into my range of consciousness with UFOs. Some people seem to be aware of them because their consciousness is in such a way that they can see that. Do you have cases where some people can see a UFO and others present can't?
Yes.
Yes, you do, yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's also alleged as well that some people can use thought and meditation to bring them in as well. So yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, the religious people would say you're calling in spirit people. So we just don't know. I don't know, and I'm sure Philip, you will agree that you don't know. We only know that something.
I wouldn't agree at all. I know everything, Tricia. I've just forgotten. I've just forgotten most of it. That's all.
You don't know Harry Edwards' name?
I do. I know.
You did?
I know everything. I've just forgotten most of it.
Philip,
that's all.
I'll believe you.
That's what I say to my wife. She'll ask me things, and I say I actually know everything, but I've just forgotten most of it. So I'm sorry, I can't tell you.
Exactly.
No, but you're right, Tricia. We don't know everything. Joking apart.
Before we go, can I just clarify my position again? I've done this.
Please do, yeah.
I've done this for over 30 years from a null standpoint, and the more I go into it, and the more I get my own experience with people. I mean, if you go to, by the way, I'll give you my website. That would be the best thing. My website is www.TriciaRobertson, all one word, and it's Robertson, remember. www.Tricia, spelled Tricia, not with an SH, TriciaRobertson. Wait a minute, I've got it forgotten now. www.triciarobertson.weebly.com, WEEBLY, and you'll find the healing study there if you can be bothered reading it, which you probably won't. And there's all sorts of background into experimentation, what we've done, and more details about the book. You'll see the covers and virtually what's in it. But you don't need to read books 1 and 2 to read book 3. Your audience probably will go straight to book 3 because it's extremely weird and unexplained. And let's face it, I go to the outer limits of human personality and what we are here and after we die.
Well, I've got to say, the title, It's Life and Death, but Not As We Know It, is a fantastic title. That is absolutely brilliant. I'm going to apologise for not asking many questions, Tricia, but I've been absolutely fascinated in listening to you this evening.
Can I just say, I know I'm a blether. I was going to call it It's Life and Death, Jim, but not as we know it. But I was dissuaded by my publisher. He said no, because believe it or not, like yourself, people in America, Canada, Spain, they're all loving these books as well. So some of them might not get, they It's life and death, Jim.
Yeah.
And I might be sued for some sort of copyright, so it's life and death, ... but not as you know it. It is.
Absolutely brilliant. Tricia Robinson, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Really, really fascinated with what you've had to say this evening. And on behalf of myself, from Outer Limits magazine, that's me, Chris Evers, I want to say thank you for joining us, and I'm sure Philip would like to thank you as well.
Fascinating as ever. Lovely to speak to you again, and I wish you every success with your new book, Tricia.
Thank you.
It will be on my Christmas list, I can assure you.
It's going very well, actually.
But it will be going even better because I'll be ordering a copy. How's that?
Excellent. Well, you can.
I'll be ordering a copy of that as well.
You can private message me and let me know what you think.
I will indeed. Thank you very much, Tricia.
Darling.
Okay, just before we go, folks, please remember you can contact myself and Philip Mantle through the Outer Limits email address, which is outerlimitsmag@gmail.com, and I'm sure Philip would like to close.
Yeah, just once again, I thank our guest Tricia from north of the border this evening. Fascinating stuff as usual, and good night and God bless.